Okay, I'll be honest with you guys. I am shook. I am overwhelmed, I'm confused, I'm flabbergasted. I have no idea what I just saw or how any of that happened, but I'm gonna do my best to explain it to you. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is MickeyJo and I am obsessed with all things theatre, and this is my theatre-themed YouTube channel where I review the shows that I have been invited to go and see as a professional theatre critic working predominantly in the West End. And one of the latest shows to open here in London is Unbelievable. The Derren Brown, I was going to say the Derren Brown musical. My brain has been melted by this show. It's not a musical. It is, however, the latest magic illusion show from popular British illusionist slash mentalist slash all-around brilliant and slightly terrifying man, Derren Brown. I say terrifying, he's not in any way scary, but I do have this prevailing irrational fear of him and the concept of magicians, but mainly just of this man. I've met him at the press launch of this show. He was lovely, so interesting to talk to. Still scares the bejesus out of me, because how does he know this many things? How does he know them? Now, he has won a record-breaking number of Olivier Awards for his live shows. He's known for his groundbreaking television specials, and with this show, for the first time, he has worked with his team and with his collaborators, Michael O'Connor and Andy Nyman, to develop something that sort of had his stamp of approval and was a Derren Brown style of a show that didn't actually feature Derren Brown. So to avoid any suspicion, right at the beginning of this video, he does not appear in this show. And I'm not just saying that because he sneakily does. I had been wondering myself if he actually would appear, but officially he does not appear on stage. He was in tonight for the gala night performance watching the show, but he wasn't in the thing. Anyhow, in today's video, I'm going to tell you what this show is, but I'm going to give you a spoiler-free explanation of that. I'm not going to tell you how the tricks work. I'm not even necessarily going to tell you what the tricks are. I'm going to try and give you a flavour of the show and help you make the decision about whether or not you might want to buy a ticket and see it for yourself. Because with things like this, it's very different to a lot of what the West End has to offer. And maybe if you're coming to this channel as a theatre or musical theatre fan, this isn't the kind of thing you might normally go and see, but it does have some musical theatre performers in it. So hopefully my review of this will help you decide whether this might be for you. Now, before I get into the review, if you enjoy today's video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming very soon. Not just of West End openings, but also a bunch of Broadway shows. By the time you see this video, I will hopefully already be in a plane over the Atlantic heading to New York, where I plan to see a whole bunch of shows and review them here on YouTube. I also share news videos, interviews, the occasional backstage drama, and all around good stagey content. So if that sounds like the kind of thing that you might be interested in, make sure you're subscribed. For now, I'm going to do my best to tell you about Unbelievable. Here we go. So the usual concept of a Derren Brown show is that he is on stage and he is going to be performing various illusions, and he will interact with members of the audience. He will throw out frisbees and invite them on stage, and they will give him prompts and help to prove that things are happening organically and that he's not, just manipulating the evening to make himself look really impressive. There will also be a kind of an overarching theme. I saw one show of his once where he was talking about faith healing as a concept and kind of exploring the ideas of how the thing actually works in a live setting. And more often than not, the whole show will end with this climactic moment where he calls back to some earlier reference or solves some sort of impossible puzzle or conjures something magically out of thin air, and it creates such a moment of awe that you end the show on a massive high. Unbelievable is different to many of his previous shows for a handful of reasons. The first being that rather than him on stage, we have a cast of 7 different performers, some of whom have a slight background in magic, but most of whom do not. They are, however, multi-talented performers for a variety of different reasons. We have Simon Lipkin of the West End, recently seen as Buddy the Elf in Elf, the musical. He's also an alumnus of shows like Assassins and Avenue Q and Miss Atomic Bomb. He's done other work as well. I don't know why that was a very random collection of shows for me to recall from Simon Lipkin's illustrious career at this point. He's joined by actors, singers, musicians, because as well as being a straightforward show of magic and illusions, it offers something of variety. We have musical instruments as a feature of this show. We have a couple of sung vocal moments in an attempt to steer Derren Brown's usual style towards something that offers a little bit more all-around entertainment. Now, without delving too much into spoilers, it begins with a pretty traditional magic trick, which is shown to us first of all and then explained from various different perspectives. It kind of shows us and unpacks the anatomy of this kind of a magic trick, and it uses that as a clever means of introducing all of the different performers of the evening. Thereafter, they will appear largely separately in different segments where everyone kind of does their own trick or introduces their own concept, some of which require more magical ability and sleight of hand and sort of fascinating skill than others. Some of them are really about precision misdirection, others are more just about presentation and showmanship. But I'll be damned if I could tell the difference. Because the thing is, after that first trick, they don't show you the anatomy of any of the rest of it, what is called the method. You don't get to find out how all of these things are being done. And as someone who habitually will look for the wires when someone is flying and will try and decipher what it is that's going on, because I think that's part of my role as a critic, to really understand how something has been brought to the stage so I can celebrate that process, I cannot tell you how any of these tricks were brought about. For some of them, I had some good working theories, and then invariably we'd get halfway through the trick and something would happen that would completely disprove my theory. I'd be like, oh, that's clearly on a wire, and then it would go through a closed ring, and I'm like, well, now it's not. Now I have no idea what's going on, and my entire grasp on reality has plummeted. Just about everything I believed was called into question this evening, and I don't even know who I am anymore. So for the skeptics among you, like myself, unless you have a great knowledge of magic, I would encourage you to just not even waste your time trying to work out how these tricks are being performed and just let your minds be blown, because it's inevitable. Honestly, I feel like it's inevitable. And there is so much audience involvement in this show. Like, there are so many opportunities for audience members to go on stage. I'll tell you more about that in a little bit, but at least half of the audience would have had to be plants in order for this to be faked in any way. It was just really mind-boggling. I honestly have no idea how half of this stuff was possible. Now, even though they kind of loosened their grip on this idea of showing you the backstage side of a magic trick, there was this theme running throughout that sort of started to fade as we got further and further into the show, talking about the history of magic. And most tricks were introduced with a little bit of an explanation as to how they originally came about and the original pioneers of those illusions, which I thought was pretty interesting and pretty informative. And I liked that that could be kind of the basis of what this show was, that it was more about kind of the history of magic, and we looked at a lot of old illusions that absolutely still stand up, but without doing that thing that they did at the beginning where they unpacked it and explained it to us, it kind of felt like we weren't getting the full picture. And I don't know, maybe it's more satisfying not to find out how these tricks actually worked, but for a handful of them, it would have been nice to find out what was going into these, what the mechanisms of all of these actually were. This feels like a good weigh in the comments section moment. Would you like to know, after seeing those tricks, how they actually worked, or do you think it would spoil the whole thing? I'm team finding out, but that's just me. Honestly, I feel like I'm the worst person to invite to a magic show because they do scare me. The whole concept of magic, which has this inherent tension to it in a magic trick, makes me more than a little bit nervous. But I, in spite of myself, had a really great time this evening, just being completely flummoxed and flabbergasted. So if I can enjoy this show, I think anyone can. Now, tonight was gala night, last night was press night, which means a lot of the reviews have already come out, and this got a bit of a lukewarm critical reception. having not read any of those reviews, I can only assume that this is because it could have been pushed a little bit further. You know, it provides a decent variety of entertainment, but there is no one particularly show-stopping element. It also ends quite abruptly. And what it lacks at that conclusion moment is what I told you about before from Derren Brown's shows, that sort of big, climactic, oh my god, my mind has been completely blown moment. Something sizable happens towards the end, but we definitely don't feel like we're ready for the whole thing to be over. As the theme of talking about the history of magic begins to fade as we progress through the show, another sort of an undercurrent emerges, and it starts to talk more and more about our perceptions of other people in the world and the versions of ourselves that we choose to portray. And it compares this to the idea of performing a magic trick right at the beginning of the show, saying that we are sort of actively deceiving people in a non-malicious sort of a way. There are things that we keep private about ourselves, that's like the methodology of a magic trick, and there are the things that we actually present, which in magic is called the effect. This gets talked about more throughout the show, and it gets brought up that gratitude is meant to be the antidote to forming negative comparisons of ourselves with other people. It's not really explained why or how this can actually be implemented, and as someone who is keen for self-help in this particular area, I'd have been very receptive to that. But I do think with a show with such seemingly unconnected magic tricks and pieces and scenes that it's good to have that sort of a consistent theme connecting the whole thing. It could have felt a little bit more connected, but I got what they were going for there. Back on the history of magic angle, there is a segment that ends the first act that pays homage to the history of women who have been magicians' assistants and the various tricks they've had to endure over time, like being sawed in half and having knives in their head and being amputated and fitting themselves into really small boxes and all of these various undignified things that they have had to do in order to facilitate different magic tricks over the years. And during the interval, the names of different magicians' assistants are then displayed on the curtain. In terms of the aesthetics of this show and its set design, we have this sort of a string curtain that they project onto. We have two screens at the side of the stage. They use cameras at various points. At one point, they put a camera on an audience member so we can see things from their perspective on stage. They also use cameras to zoom in on different audience members who are involved from their seats and onto things on stage so that we can see close-up magic to prove that, you know, they're not just getting away with something because we can't see it really closely. I really enjoy the projection design. I think it looks fantastic and it helps to vary the aesthetic of the show between scenes. Otherwise, I think it could get really samey. The whole thing doesn't feel like it lags. It feels like it's quite buoyant in terms of its pace and we go from scene to scene. There wasn't one particular moment except for a sequence with drinks that I thought may have got on for a little bit too long. I mentioned songs. Now that end of Act 1 sequence features the song There's No Business Like Show Business. I don't think this is a magic related spoiler that song gets sung. It's sung completely a cappella, which at the beginning is quite stirring and then becomes just a little bit strange, but you know, it's still sort of ominous and mysterious. And Simon Lipkin sings a song about water that I don't know if that's an original song or if I ought to know that from somewhere. Very Harold Hill, very P.T. Barnum-esque. In fact, it reminded me of There's a Sucker Born Every Minute from the musical Barnum. Now, before I tell you about the performers, I want to talk more about the additional member of this cast, which is the audience. There is so much audience involvement in this show. Now, this was a gala night performance, which meant they had to do things a little bit differently, but ordinarily, I think, at the point of purchasing tickets, you get to opt in or out of involvement and you get to tick a box to say you would potentially like to be in this show. And given that this is a pretty small theatre and how many people they involved, I think you have a pretty good chance of actually being selected. So if that sways you, if you want to go up on the Criterion stage and if you want to go for a night out with friends or family where someone might get called up on stage, if that sounds like fun to you, it's terrifying to me, but if you like the idea of that, then that's another reason to go and see Unbelievable. And if this is anxiety inducing to you, no one has to do anything, no one really has to talk much or say much. Mostly people get called onto stage just to like think of something and then verify whether or not that thing has actually happened under a whole variety of circumstances. But if you do get involved, then you might just get a free drink out of it or something even more sizable. And all of the audience involvement is done in such a charming and inclusive way that it really creates a strong community sense within the auditorium, which I think is really nice, especially when the intention of a lot of these shows can be more sort of eerie and off-putting. There's a vibe throughout this one that acknowledges the tension of a magic trick, but does away with it. There's a lot more warmth here than perhaps I was expecting there to be. So now I want to talk to you about the performers in this cast. Some of them get a little bit more material than others. Simon Lipkin really gets the thrust of the thing, and he feels like the most obvious leader. He also introduces the show, and in terms of the role that he fulfills, he feels very much like the showman. It's unsurprising that he is the one with the musical theatre chops. We get a little bit of a song and dance element, but he is just leading the whole thing and guiding the audience with such confidence and authority. He also, I believe, has the most magic experience, or one of the performers with the most magic experience out of this cast. But he's fantastic in this show, and his personality really shines through. His ability to ad-lib just occasionally with audience members, just to interject something to put them at ease, and to just say something funny in those moments also serves him very well in this show. Alongside him, there is the actor Samuel Creasy. He is so charming and so lovable, and without really fitting into the stereotype, he starts to feel like the kind of a character within this who is more like your everyday man on the street who has been taught how to do magic tricks. The perspective that he seems to bring to some of his dialogue is that he has learned these tricks for the show, and he feels less like a very trained magician and more like a really relatable guy. And that's another route through which we can access this show in a more accessible way than many magic shows, I think. Which I do think is kind of deliberate. There's something about a Derren Brown show that is meant to be deliberately mysterious and a little bit inaccessible, and this one feels a lot more open to us, hence explaining the trick at the beginning. Samuel is another one who is very funny and has very easy banter with any audience member that he brings on stage. Laura Andresen Guimarães is another one of the performers. I really would like to see more of her in this show. She is a musician and a singer and the magician's assistant at one point in this show. She sings the song There's No Business Like Show Business. I think she has a really brilliant presence, and I would like for her to have a little bit more focus. Another one that we do see a little bit more of is Yolanda Ovid. She has this really beautiful magic sequence in the second act and just a very endearing and charming rapport with the audience as well. Now, Hannah Price is a performer we don't hear too much from. She's an instrumentalist on stage, but also completes various illusions. She's sort of mysterious and enigmatic, and some of the stuff that she manages to do on stage, I have no idea how she's doing it, but it's incredibly impressive. We also have Isalni Batista Nascimento Jr. and Alexander Bean, who are also musicians throughout the show. And again, I would like to see a little bit more of both of them. And in terms of the makeup of this ensemble cast, I feel like this is one of the ways in which the show is a little bit underdeveloped. And I think within this, rather than everyone just trying to be like mysterious and coming on like, now I'm going to tell you a trick, now I'm going to tell you a trick, I think there's room for them to discern their own characters and their own identities a little further. If Simon is going to be this sort of central showman and Samuel's going to be a little bit more comedic and a little bit more down to earth, I think there's room for each of them to move into slight variations on those magical personalities, even if they're sort of different styles of magicians through the ages, all of the various different magical ideas that Derren Brown has explored in his different live shows over the years. I think that would be a clever feature, rather than just having them be different sort of enigmatic, faceless presenters or just on-stage musicians. Similarly, another thing that sets this apart from a lot of Derren Brown shows and has probably disappointed some of the other critics who have reviewed this is that there isn't much meaning to a lot of the tricks. We talk about the history of magic and we talk about this idea of how we feel about ourselves and other people, but those things don't really connect too strongly to the different tricks that are performed. Equally, there were some moments at the gala night performance where things seemed to go wrong. Now, there are two versions of this. There were things that seemed to go wrong and just seem a little bit clunky and never really get followed up on, and they kind of try and quickly brush those aside. Then there are things that are deliberately and ostensibly going wrong that later turn out to be red herrings and actually something much more clever was happening in the background, which I did suspect. But there's absolutely no room for you to celebrate and congratulate yourself for thinking that something was going to happen, because as soon as it does, you still have no idea how they pulled that off in the first place. So it's not like I could sit there and go, aren't I clever for seeing that twist coming, when I have no idea how they managed to do it. But in summary on this one, it is mysterious and confusing, and it left me completely awestruck, but it also has this warmth to it and this tenderness and this lightness of touch. In the very last trick that they portray, there's an awful lot of heart. You may even shed a tear in the final moments of this show, because it is quite meaningful. That being said, I don't think it's the most groundbreaking night out at a magic show. I think it's just something that is trying to be a little bit more crowd-pleasing and well-rounded. But those have been my tentative, slightly confused and shapeless thoughts about Unbelievable at the Criterion Theatre in the West End. Now, this first previewed at the Mercury Theatre in Colchester. If you got to see it there, or if you've already seen it at the Criterion in the West End, comment down below with what you thought about the show, but let's try and keep the comments section spoiler-free as well. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming soon of all of your favourite West End shows. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!